Pope Francis accused of heresy on 7 points by 19 scholars. The 7 accounts of heresy on Pope Francis is a 20-page document. It was done by 19 scholars. Now look at heresy. It's a deviation from truth of church dogma. They're accusing the Pope of 7 accounts of heresy. Now there are 2 ways one can commit heresy in the Catholic Church. 1, refusing to believe in Christ himself. 2, restricting belief to certain points of Christ's doctrine, selective and fashionable at pleasure. This is the way of heretics. In other words, if it feels good, do it dogma. So the question here is the Pope committing heresy in the Church? In other words, is heresy being committed by Pope Francis in the Church? And I'm going to show in this video that I believe it is. Now the first heresy being committed in the Church today is the Church refusing to believe in Christ? And the answer is yes. Now we heard in the letter from Pope Benedict, he affirmed in his recent letter that the Eucharist is treated as a mere piece of bread within the Church, and that parishioners receive the Eucharist today only on certain holidays. There's apostasy occurring in the Church, and this is one of the criteria of heresy, the lack of belief in Christ. 2, is the Pope restricting belief to certain points of Christ's doctrine, selective and fashion at pleasure? The answer is yes. Therefore, Pope Francis is acting as a heretic. Some on YouTube claim we must be patient and resist the Pope. However, the frog is beginning to boil in the pot, and many will be lost on the day of the Lord. When it comes, many, many will be lost. Sister Lucia Fatima told Father Fuentes this. Because as we wait patiently, many are believing what is a lie. So that's the sad point of it. So I want to take a look at, is the Pope a heretic? Let's take a look at some major upheavals in the Church that have happened recently. Now the first one I want to draw your attention to is Pope Francis praised Italy's leading proponent of abortion, Emma Bonino, as one of the nation's forgotten greats, comparing her to the great historical figures such as Konrad Adenauer and Robert Schuman. Here's a video. I'm going to show you an excerpt from an interview with Emma Bonino. Here's a picture of Pope Francis with her.
How do you assess, or how do you read the fact that the Pope has hosted you? It has a meaning.
It has a meaning with this Pope, who is a Pope that is more inclusive, that is not there to judge people. Even on homosexuality, he said, who I am to judge.
Here's a picture of George Soros and Emma Bonino. Now, George Soros, One World Order leader, has been sending a lot of money to the Vatican. Now, number 2, Pope Francis reveals on homosexuality. Who am I to judge?
If a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge him?
Also, the Vatican endorsed homosexuality, the sin of sodomy, and Pope Francis appointed Father James Martin as an official advisor of the Vatican Communications in 2017. He's a pro-homosexual and LGBT activist and priest.
Well, it's very moving. The Pope is saying something that pretty much every reputable psychologist and psychiatrist and biologist knows, which is that, people are born that way, if they're gay or lesbian.
Here are some pictures of Pope Francis wearing a rainbow cross. Now, why would you wear a rainbow cross? Why would you endorse Father James Martin if you weren't pro-gay, pro-homosexual, pro-LGBT? You wouldn't do this if you weren't pro-homosexual, pro-LGBT. In fact, bishops also wore the rainbow cross, showing conformity to Pope Francis's wearing of the rainbow cross. In addition, Pope Francis has also been pictured wearing a rainbow bracelet, also a sign that he's pro-LGBT, pro-gay, pro-homosexual. How long do we wait patiently and resist the Pope? Do we wait until same-sex marriages start to be performed in the Church? Do we wait till LGBT men can become priests? Here's another third reason to question Pope Francis, don't obsess over abortion or gays.
Days after saying the church should stop obsessing about gays and abortion.
Thursday, in a magazine interview, Pope Francis blasted church hardliners for focusing on small-minded rules that are divisive, like abortion, gay marriage, and contraception.
He's a people person, and I think he understands the changes in the church.
And Bill Maher?
I am not exactly sure what this Pope wants, but I'm starting to fear it's my time slot.
A fourth reason to question Pope Francis when he said there is no hell and that all go to heaven.
The founder of La Republic newspaper made a stir a few days ago. Following a meeting with the Pope, he published a summary of the conversation in which he said Pope Francis told him hell didn't exist.
Dai.
A fifth reason to question Pope Francis when he put a statue of Martin Luther in the Vatican and said Martin Luther was a reformer who did not err. And Pope Francis also said that he was profoundly thankful for spiritual and theological gifts received through the Reformation. And that's a heretical statement by Pope Francis. And take a look at the stole, the white stole around Martin Luther's neck in the Vatican. That's heresy too. You're making a man who caused division and schism in the church and making him a priest. That's heretical action. And then for the Pope to say he was profoundly thankful for the spiritual and theological gifts from the Reformation is heresy because it caused division in the church. Now we're going to look at the 7 points of heresy by 19 scholars against Pope Francis. The first one we're going to look at, these 19 scholars point out, it's impossible to be perfect for the justified and those in God's grace. It's basically a summation of what they said. And basically, Pope Francis has been promoting the idea that it's impossible to be perfect, but look in the church history and see all the saints that never committed mortal sin. Second point they make, Christians can have full knowledge of sin, break the commandments, and not be in mortal sin. So what constitutes a mortal sin? You have to have full knowledge of it, and you have to have the your full intent to commit that sin. And there's even planning that goes involved in it. And then you go ahead and commit that sin. But he's saying in certain situations you could break the commandments and it's not a mortal sin. You can go right up and receive communion. Another point they make, a person can still offend God even when obeying his commands. Now Pope Francis said if you're sinning, why go to church? So Pope Francis promulgates this idea that if you're offending God, you can still offend him obeying his commands. You can go to church, and that offends him when you're sinning, so why bother going to church? 4, conscience dictates sexual acts between two people in a civil marriage, even though one or both are sacrament married to someone else and can sometimes be morally right, requested, or commanded by God. So this is another heresy that Pope Francis promulgates, the idea that you can be involved with someone else in a civil marriage, even though that person's sacramentally married to somebody else. 5, it is false that the only sexual acts deemed morally right or illicit are only between a husband and a wife. Pope Francis promulgates that there are other types of sexual acts, homosexual acts, which are deemed licit. So he nullifies that it's just between a man and a woman. 6, moral truths and moral principles contained in divine and natural law have no absolutes that are forbidden. This can even go to the point that saying that it's okay for bestiality. I mean, if there's no moral truth and no moral principles, no divine law, no natural law, then anything's possible, right? This is what Pope Francis promulgates. 7. God wills and permits and positively wills other religions, both Christian and non-religion. So he's saying, Pope Francis, that atheists are okay, and it's positively willed by God, other religions. This is a heresy because polytheism, the worship of other gods, goes against the commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So I really believe there's a schism going on between the church. The schism is between Pope Benedict XVI's traditional beliefs and which goes against Pope Francis's liberal agenda. So there's a schism definitely going on in the church right now, even though you may not be able to see it clearly. And it's going to become more profound until the angelic pope, which could be Pope Benedict XVI, or another man to come, who will take the name of Joseph, because Pope Benedict's name is Joseph. And this angelic pope is going to reign with the great monarch, who's like another Charles Martel. Well, thanks for watching this video. Remember, we're living in the last days. Pray, fast, and live a pure life. Give your heart to Jesus. God bless.